This video will show you how to complete page 24 out of your math book. It says you are playing a game using the spinner below. The game requires that you spin the spinner twice. For example, one outcome could be yellow on the first spin and red on the second spin. List the sample space, which is all the possible outcomes for the two spins. Okay, so it's not asking you how many are in the sample space or how many possible outcomes are there. It's having you list them. So my recommendation to keep this organized is to do a counting tree, also known as a tree diagram, okay? And remember, we're going to be spinning the spinner twice. So how I've shown you, I'm sorry, but we can't use this space down here because we'll need it for this part, but I'm going to try to smush it all over here. To start up our counting tree, I always have you write the word start. And then you're going to list out, from that start, you're going to have your branches, for your counting tree. And when you start off and you do the first spin, the possibilities that you can land on are yellow, red, green, or blue. So from there, I'm going to do those 4 branches. And I'm not going to write out the word yellow. I'll just abbreviate it, or I'll just represent Y. Use Y to represent yellow. And then we got red, green, and blue. Okay, and that would be the first spin. So to kind of keep myself organized, I'm going to draw a column around that, and I'm going to label that first spin so I don't lose track of what's going on or where I'm at in this counting tree, okay? So now, if the first time when I spun, I landed on yellow, and when I went to spin a second time, what could you possibly land on? Well, you can land on any one of those options again, okay? Because the two spins are independent of each other. Independent of each other means, hey, it's still there. If I landed on yellow, I didn't erase it off the board. It's still there. I have the possibility to land on it. So that's an independent event. So on the second spin, I can land on yellow, or I can land on red, or I can land on green, or I can land on blue. Okay? Now let's say I landed on red the first spin. Well, that second spin, I can land on yellow, red, green, or blue. Okay, now let's say the first time you spun, you landed on green. The second time you spin, you can, again, land on any one of those possibilities. And notice how I'm keeping them in order. I'm not mixing them up. I'm being consistent with yellow, red, green, or blue. Okay, and if the first time I spun, I landed on blue, that second spin, I can land on yellow, red, green, or blue. Okay? So just to keep this straight in my brain, I'm going to show this as being labeled second spin, because that fulfills this criteria. You're spinning it twice. Now this is not my sample space, also known as all the possible outcomes. That's where this comes in. You will just literally trace it with your finger, and I'm going to get a different color to help designate this, okay? So say when I spun the first time I landed on yellow, the second time I landed on yellow again. So yellow, yellow. And it helps if you kind of trace it in a different color, because then you can see, oh, I've already counted that one. Okay, I can do yellow and then red. Yellow and then green I could have landed on. I could have landed on yellow and then blue. Could have landed on red and then yellow. Could have landed on red and then red again. Red and then green. Could have landed on red and then blue. Could have landed on green and then yellow. Green and then red. And then green and green. And so on and so forth until you get all of these right here, okay? And then you will draw a rectangle around it. And I want you to label that rectangle around it as the sample space. And another name for the sample space is all the possible outcomes. And these are all the possible outcomes right here in spinning the spinner 2 times. And there happens to be 16 possible outcomes. Okay? And it's not asking for how many, but I think it's a good thing to just have written down in case further questions are asked about it. Okay? For number 6, it says list the sample space for the chance experiment of flipping a coin twice. Okay? So it wants you to list it. We want to find the sample space. Another word for sample space, the way they would label it, is all the possible outcomes. Okay? So I like you to just write start first. So you're going to start and you're going to flip a coin the first time. And it's we're going to assume it's a two-sided coin, you know, a heads or tail side. So you can land on heads or tails for that first flip. We're going to label that the first flip, okay? Well, it says we got to flip the coin twice. So this right here is my first flip. Now let's hone in on this heads. If we landed on heads first, the second time you flip it, since the heads is still there on the coin, you can land on it again. Or you could have landed on tails, okay? Well, let's say the first time you flipped, you landed on tails first. When you go to flip the second time, the tails is still on that coin, so you can land on that again, or you can land on heads. Okay? And we're going to label this the second flip. Now remember how I told you to be consistent and do heads and tails and then heads and tails? When it's something this small where there's only 2 options, it doesn't really matter. I don't think I'd get mixed up. But something up here, in the previous problem where we had kind of a lot to list, that's a better idea to keep it consistent, okay? So anyway, this column right here, we're going to label it second flip. Now we haven't listed the sample space yet because that comes right here. Just trace it. So for your sample space, if you landed on heads the first time, you could land on heads the second time. If you land on heads the first time, you could land on tails on that second flip. You can go tails first on the first flip and then tails on the second flip. You can land on tails on the first flip and then heads on the second flip. Now this, and you'll see I designated a different color for it because it's not the same as flipping. This is the sample space, okay? This is all the possible outcomes. It's all the possible outcomes for flipping a coin 2 times. This is all not call. Okay, and how many possible outcomes? There are 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 possible outcomes. Those are the 4 things that could happen. Okay. So if I asked you something like, hey, what's the probability of landing on tails twice? You would say, oh, 1 out of 4. Okay. If I asked you what's the possibility of landing on heads and then tails, you would say 1 out of 4. Okay? Because there's 4 possible outcomes. All right, bye.